It's that time of the year. That's right, it's time for 2017. That was the year that was. Basically an excuse for me to point at a ton of things which I loved this year, while vaguely gushing about why they were my favourites. Everyone's idea of a perfect holiday present, right? Right. On with the show! Oh, immersive sims, another fun genre title like Walking Simulator which fails to adequately convey anything tangible. Well, except to Warren Spector, of course. He knows. Oh, how he knows. Prey kicks off with an absolute belter of an opening, which I'm itching to spoil, but I think it was a few hours down the line when I was regularly turning into a coffee cup and tumbling through blocked doors when I knew I was in love. The game takes place aboard the Talos 1 space station, and this place is a major contender for this year's Space Architecture of the Year award. It feels like a real space, from the confines of the ship's quarters to the sprawling guts which run down the backbone of the ship. Even its name, Talos, is a measured choice, with its namesake being the mythical giant bronze automaton which protected Crete from invaders. I see what you did there, Arkane. I see what you did. As well as lifting from Greek mythology, Prey excels at one of the aspects of immersive sims which I find the most interesting. It actively uses its setting in order to tell its stories, whether that be through the emails and notes in the environment to a full-blown D&D campaign. Prey highlights the potential of environmental storytelling while hosts of other games have you just blast through another one of their, admittedly pretty, environments. Essentially, I'm a sucker for exploring places and weaseling out their secrets, even though this goes against my own on-again, off-again crusade against stories taking place post the fact of the narrative. I'm fickle, what else can I say? Personally, Prey challenged my usual approach to the immersive sim. A staple of the genre is the choice of stealth or action, or anywhere on the spectrum in between. I tend towards the stealth end of this spectrum, enjoying the challenge of not being seen, stealthing my way around levels while slowly picking off enemies in whatever non-lethal manner the game offers. Prey challenged this playstyle by essentially discarding the non-lethal route. Sure, you can still invest in stealth and avoid a lot of the encounters, but you're not going to be able to passively knock the aliens unconscious and drag them to a dark corner. You've got to confront them. In forcing me to break with my tried and tested methods for immersive sims, it led to glorious moments like this. The game wasn't without fault, however, with much of the supporting cast a bit paper thin with the nasty habit of talking over each other. The last couple of hours and the ending is also not great. I've mellowed on it a bit since my initial shock, but still, what can you do? A mild tarnish on an otherwise remarkable game, which you could say has preyed on my mind since I completed it. Truly impressive. Survival horror. After having finally played through the original Evil Within recently, I decided I needed more of lead Sebastian Castellanos' confused look, so I bought the sequel, and very much enjoyed it. Where the original was a fairly linear run from start to finish, albeit with a couple of more open areas to explore along the way, the sequel opts for a semi-open world approach, while having some linear sections too. The stealth which sort of clung onto the skeleton of the first has been a bit fleshed out, and the combination of my terrible aim and the dodging and weaving of the game's enemies as you try to pull off a headshot is fantastic. The Evil Within 2 doesn't attempt to recreate this survival horror genre, but it makes you realise that sometimes innovation for innovation's sake isn't the best course of action to take. Sometimes refinement is a worthy route to pursue, and The Evil Within 2 is a shining example of tried and tested ideas executed excellently. If only I could say the same of the overarching narrative. The tale of shadowy organisations and the backstory of Sebastian's family never really grabbed me, though the constituent parts leading up to the final revelations were mostly great. The first villain of the game, the artiste who captures and loops the slow-motion deaths of the team sent in before you, was a particular highlight. His finest work, that of the Obscurer. Literal chills. So I talked about this in a slightly more spoilery fashion in another video, and surprise surprise, Pyre's also one of my favourites of this year. To explain the game so briefly is to do it a disservice, but here goes. It's fantasy basketball, but where instead of teams composed of those helpful fellas who reach the top shelf for you at the supermarket, you find yourself controlling a diverse cast of witches and worms and everything in between. And Rookie, of course. Oh, Rookie. When you're not shooting some fiery ritual hoops, you're on the tour bus chatting away. As you journey ever on through the tournament, the details of the world you find yourself in and the backstories of your compatriots are slowly unveiled. My biggest gripe with the game is that I never found the actual rights, the basketball matches, of the game to flow quite right. You control a single character at a time with your other characters glued to their spot until you switch control or pass the orb to them. On paper, this should lead to that sweet combination of planning ahead while also having to deal with the here and now. In practice, however, this all too often boils down to having your fastest characters dunk on your opponents repeatedly by outmaneuvering them, while the rest of your team hang out near the back of the court. It's a minor niggle in a game which otherwise does something really cool with its characters that, again, I won't spoil here, but take it on faith that it's super awesome. Tacoma marks my first Explorer map on the list. Such restraint shown. Some people call them walking simulators, but we all know my name's better. Anywho, Tacoma is the new one from Fullbright, those lovely folks behind the teen coming of age / 1995 diorama Gone Home. This time, instead of capitalising on nostalgia and the grounding of using a time which, has actually existed, we make a jump into the future and head off to space for a jaunt around an abandoned space station while learning all about the fun things space capitalism has in store for us down the line. The game's main focus is, like Gone Home, on the environments and what people leave behind. Unlike Gone Home, however, this time we actually get to see the conversations of the people who were there before too. The game achieves this with 3D echoes of the crew's conversations. This addition of avatars into the space does something quite magical to the Explorer map formula, serving as both an exposition dump and as a virtual guide through the space. And that's pretty much it for Tacoma. The background of this future and the individual characters within it are the real draw. While the overarching narrative lacks the personal connection Gone Home nailed so well, its exploration of the nature of artificial intelligence never quite hitting all the notes that it feels it wants to. But then again, the ship's cat is called Margaret Catwood, so it basically just wins on that, right? Campy fun which occasionally punches you right in the gut, Nier Automata's an odd beast. In discussion of the game, the conversation usually ends up at the contentious issue that the game requires multiple playthroughs. Just wait until ending E, the initiated say with a knowing wink to others who have finished the game. This does the game a disservice, the assumption being that unlocking the true ending requires playing through an identical sequence 5 times. Let me say that this is explicitly not what the game requires. The very act of replaying Automata is essential to the story's delivery, strengthening the power of this multi-layered narrative of what it means to be alive. The combat of Nier Automata is fast and flashy with explosions all over the shop, but it's never really too deep or too much of a challenge. Multiple weapon types and upgrades keep it fresh, and the game even offers the welcome addition of an automatic fighting mode, which allows you to breeze your way through combat and just experience the story. I haven't really done the game justice here in this short little segment, but as with all of these, please play it. Glory to mankind. Cosmo D has a fantastic skill. He takes the mundane pedestrian places which people pass through day in and day out and turns them into something magical, something like the Norwood suite. His previous game Off-Peak did this by focusing on its cathedral-like train station and the oddball characters within it, while his new game takes place in a hotel. Another one of those liminal places which people all too often skim through in life. These fantastical places are locations to be savoured, music and imagery combined together into this heady mix that's hard to put down in words. Sure, mechanically the games are, at their basis level, collectathons, but that's just an excuse to drive the players forward. An excuse with which to ferry you through these outlandish spaces to experience all they have to offer. The power behind these games is that they nail an aesthetic. That's not to say that these strange places fit together architecturally or stylistically, but that the twists and turns within these locales are earned within the scope of these odd worlds. The weirdness ebbs and flows, and you'll eventually find yourself embracing the game's strange logic, chilling to some ambient beats in the coolest hotel you've ever had the pleasure of visiting. So yes, please consider staying a night in the Norwood suite. I promise, it's one you won't forget. The Dishonored series has always been very much my jam. Little bit of magic? Check. Multiple routes and options? Check. Ballsing up your well thought out plan only to have to improvise on the fly? Check. Dishonored is a series which encourages you to experiment, to engage with its systems and think, but what if I did this? Well, of course that is until you end up just skulking around on rooftops, knocking everyone out and hiding them in dark corners. Creature of habit, I suppose. Death of the Outsider, on the other hand, takes the beating heart of Dishonored and distills it down into some sort of heart vodka. Unlike the core series, players can no longer unlock a whole host of abilities with runes. Instead, they always have the same 3, boosted and augmented in various ways with bone charms that you find throughout the world. This means that the world can be that much tighter. The wealth of options available in immersive sims means that any obstacle has to have multiple routes to traverse it, and this sometimes waters down the thrill of teasing out a way through. In Death of the Outsider, on the other hand, the designers almost precisely know what the player is capable of doing at any moment, and thus can design interesting obstacles, which still have multiple approaches, but with those choices limited by those same 3 powers for every player, meaning that those solutions are just that bit more satisfying to work out. And you can steal people's faces? So yeah, Game of the Year +++. Wolfenstein 2 is another one that's gained a place at the Edquarters analysis table. Here is a game that walks the knife edge between schlock and sincere, before falling off that knife edge into sincerity, rolling about a bit and then paddling in schlock for good measure. Of course, this is all part of the charm, constantly wrong-footing you and making the humour funnier and the pain more agonising. Well, at least in the periods between creating Nazi pulp and mist, that is. Mechanically speaking, the first half of the game is a slog, but a justifiable one since it pays off in the second half. The overarching story is basically fine. Not great, but fine. Whereas the personal journey of BJ is one of my favourites told in video games. I'm still conflicted on this one, but it's made me question my views on it so much it deserves a place here purely for my own peace of mind at the fear of missing it off. And the party scene. Well, that just full on deserves an award of its own, really.
Insatiable gods of darkness.
Hellblade's one which I've been meaning to talk about for a while, but unfortunately I left it on the back burner a bit too long and my initial ideas boiled away. I've since re-examined my notes though, so I can share some of them here. After all, what are Game of the Year videos for if not venting some general thoughts about stuff? At its heart, Hellblade is aiming to be an empathy machine, a commercially viable one, but an empathy machine nonetheless. The closeness of the third-person camera, Senua's inner dialogue, and the mixture of puzzles, exploration and combat that make up the bulk of the game all feed into this attempt at placing you in the headspace of someone else, someone who experiences psychosis. The sound design of this game is phenomenal and strengthens its message. The whispers of the Furies, Senua's inner conflicting voices, come from all around you, aiding her at times while putting her down at others, and the voice acting of Senua herself is great. Gold stars all round, sound team. Gold stars all round. The success of Hellblade is largely due to the efforts of the developers who went to great lengths to try and craft a well-informed piece rather than reinforcing negative stereotypes of mental illness. The team at Ninja Theory consulted with the Wellcome Trust and experts on voice hearing throughout development to ensure that they handled the subject matter sensitively. They aim to inform rather than lazily using Senua as a crazy protagonist fighting her inner demons. In this regard, I think they succeed about as well as they could within the confines of a video game. The use of pareidolia as a puzzle mechanic with gates being unlocked through finding the shapes of runes in the environment was a good introduction to the condition, if not a little bit on the nose. Overall, this game is a triumph in its positive and sensitive depiction of struggling with mental illness, and while there have been criticisms of the specifics of its portrayal of psychosis, layered as it is under a historical lens, I think that Hellblade still gets much more right than it gets wrong, and can proudly stand as part of a cultural shift in improving public knowledge and insight into mental illness. The title still blows though. And rounding off the list is a game which hit me in ways I didn't even know video games could hit. What Remains of Edith Finch took a lens to the nature of stories themselves, exploring how we use them as coping mechanisms. On top of this, and most importantly, it looked at family. Explore 'em-ups all too often share a problem. In order to provide a world which can be explored as an archaeologist, the action must have already taken place. The meat of the narrative has happened and you're there to pick up the pieces and uncover the stories which came before. Sure, some walking simulators phrase the question a bit differently and have the player character woven into the story of the world, but you're still essentially a passive observer. The brilliance of What Remains of Edith Finch is that it manages to solve this problem in a novel way. Sure, you arrive in an abandoned house post the main events of the narrative, but this game manages to capture the immediacy of the various stories it has to tell. It does this by letting you live those stories, scooping you up and putting you inside the heads of Edith's family for the vignettes they each have to show. The standout sequence for me was Lewis Finch's story. It was so good, I even made a video on it. The strength of Lewis's sequence is that you get to sit inside the head of someone unhappy with their lot. You experience the daily monotony which grinds him down as he constantly looks for an escape. It's so personal and something near everyone can relate to. The excellent bit is that it then lets you play out that escape, that daydream, alongside the repetitive job of slicing fish heads. The combination of input and story gel together so perfectly that the ending of the sequence hits you all the harder. And that was the end of that, as they say. 2017's sure been a rollercoaster of a year, and, I think, a very good year for video games. Let's wait and see what 2018 brings. But for now, until next time folks,